Hi, today I am talking about how to give feedback that someone can actually use. Hi, I'm Nile Harris, a life strategist, business consultant, and speaker, working with growing entrepreneurs and professionals to pursue their passion with a plan by gaining clarity, setting goals, and getting things done. Now, before we get started with how to give effective feedback effectively that people can use, please take a moment to like my YouTube channel, turn on the alerts so you know when I post new content, and join me online at I'm Nile Harris at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and catch me on LinkedIn at Nile Harris. Let's connect and continue the conversation there. So one of the frustrating things for me, and I'm sure for you out there listening, is when you receive feedback that you can't do anything with. It's vague. You don't know what the person wants you to do, or the person has never actually paid attention to you, and you're not even clear what that is. So part of when I am coaching people on being high performers, so reigniting that warrior spirit, getting into that warrior spirit and being leaders, is how to give feedback that doesn't suck, right? Like how to give feedback that people can actually use and to improve and get better. And because feedback is a gift, but if the gift isn't delivered well, it's not useful. And so I want to really quickly today talk about giving some good feedback or how to give good feedback. The Office is one of the shows that I love because it's funny because it's kind of true, right? It's one of those things. And one of the episodes that I thought resonated with me was when Michael Scott was giving out performance reviews, and he was kind of going to everybody and saying things, but Angela was giving her testimonial. She was giving like her on-camera testimonial, and she was talking about how she takes great pride in her performance and how she loves performance reviews and she can't wait to hear how well she's been doing. And the camera zooms out and she's walking up to Michael's office. Michael's called her in and she's walking and she's, prim and she's, pulling herself together because she cannot wait to get her feedback. And Pam says that Michael's girlfriend is on the phone and he's so excited to talk to his girlfriend. He turns, he spins, he runs into his office. And as he's doing this, he yells out to Angela, "Your performance was adequate." And it was totally satisfactory is what he said. And he shuts the door. And that was the whole of her performance review. And while that might not happen exactly to us, we do get feedback that we literally, like, we just don't know what to do with it. So we want to be the solution that you want to see in the world. So I'm sharing how I learned to give feedback in a very effective way. And I used to spend my summers, I've talked about this before, spend a few summers in a row where I did leadership development because I just wasn't getting it at work. And so I spent my own resources to create my own personal development curriculum, and these leadership camps were part of it. And we were given a specific formula on how to give feedback. We were split into teams, and every day for 5 days, we did exercises all day. We did different tasks and challenges. And we might have something like 7 or 8 challenges in a day. And every time we completed a challenge, the leader of the challenge would receive feedback, and it would be delivered in a very specific way. And there were some rules around this. The person just had to receive the feedback, and all they could say was thank you. They couldn't defend. And the feedback had to be delivered in a particular way. We had to first say, what worked well, what didn't work well, and what we like to see done differently. So I'm going to walk through how to deliver this feedback, and also using that format that we learned. And it was very effective. And we rotated each leader. So every person got this same very equitable way of receiving and giving feedback. This wasn't based on someone's perception, whether they liked you, because one of the things about feedback is we tend to see people and things as we are, not as they are. So let's get started. When giving feedback, I think one of the most important things is to assess somebody's willingness to receive feedback. Now, whether or not you are the manager and you're required to provide feedback, or perhaps this is just someone on a team that you lead through influence, or it's a colleague or a peer, and you want to provide them feedback because you care, and this might be something that's a blind spot for them. You want to assess their willingness for feedback. And I also want to point out that we tend to think of performance reviews or feedback as receiving negative information. Feedback is also a time to provide good information, to encourage people, and you want to see them continuing to do things that they're doing really well. So this way that we're going to be talking about feedback is not just for giving negative feedback, it is also for giving positive feedback, feedback that people can do something with. So the first thing is assessing someone's capacity or willingness to receive feedback in the first place. I learned this lesson, and I think a lot of people probably skip this, but I learned this lesson as a 19-year-old intern. I interned at a large investment bank in Chicago Board of Trade. I was 19. This was my first little internship after my freshman year of college, and I was kind of a mess. I didn't, dress particularly well. And when I say I didn't dress well, I mean I didn't dress for the job I want, not the job I have, sort of thing. But there was another woman who had started. If I was 19, she was probably 23, 24-ish, somewhere in there. And another young single Black woman, and they felt, or there was a perception that they did not like the way she dressed. I admit that sometimes it was a bit out of policy, and it seemed to the other folks that worked there that it was a bit more provocative than they would have liked. It just wasn't the button-down sort of shirt and uniform of the trade floor. So I do not know why at all, but I was asked if I would speak to her and just kind of bring attention to her dress and, have her, try to dress differently. I just went right in and, tried to talk to her. I was never one to really avoid difficult conversations, and so I just went right into it. And I learned a valuable lesson after she let me have it. I did not really, I had no business doing that. I was too naive to push back and really think about the circumstance of why I was being asked to speak to her in the first place. But second, I didn't really gauge, where she was in terms of how she wanted to receive feedback, even if she would be welcome to receiving feedback from me. I wasn't a peer. I was an intern. I was somebody that this wasn't my full-time job, and I was going to return back to school. So she didn't necessarily see me as an equal on top of that. And so I didn't really gauge whether or not she was open to receiving feedback from a peer or anyone. So you really have to look at that. And the ways that you can gauge someone's capacity for receiving feedback is, check out their nonverbal cues. Are their arms folded? Are they looking around? Do they not make eye contact with you? So, look for those nonverbal cues, because nonverbal cues are the biggest part of communication. Second, rely on past behaviors to predict their response. If they've not taken feedback well in the past, they probably won't take it well now. That is not to say that feedback has always been delivered well to them. So keep that in mind. If there's nothing that frustrates me more than just to continue to receive vague feedback, and then I get more vague feedback as feedback. So really understand that maybe their response is out of frustration, not necessarily out of not wanting to learn more about themselves or potentially find out blind spots that they might have. Third, in assessing people's capacity for feedback is to simply ask them how they prefer feedback. I really don't understand sometimes our unwillingness to, as leaders, ask people or people who have leadership titles, there's a difference, just ask people how they want to receive feedback, either negative feedback or opportunities for improvement or positive feedback. Some people don't like very public recognition. They like very private recognition, a little pat on the back, or maybe a private email or text or phone call. Some love to be celebrated. Some, hey, I'm open to feedback, but I need it to be specific and actionable. I'm in that camp. I'm open for feedback, but I'm going to need you to provide examples. I don't do well with vague feedback because I can't do anything with it. So my reaction to vague feedback tends to be to push back. So the next thing is adopting the proper feedback structure. And I talked about this a little bit early on. Now, when we deliver that feedback, we want to follow a specific structure. And the structure that we did was provide what worked well, what didn't work well, and what you would like to see done differently. A quick thing to remember, and this is very much the same structure, but most people tend to remember it very quickly: start, stop, continue. I would like to see you start doing this, stop doing this, and continue doing this. Now, I always tend to, whatever way I'm doing it, I always start with the positive first. So if I'm doing start, stop, continue, I actually do continue, stop, start, because I want to start with the positive, put those opportunities for improvement right there in the middle, and then start doing this, or if this is what I would like to see done differently. Because, and there's a reason for this, the brain focuses on the negative. So when you start with something positive, it gives people something to anchor to. And if you say something negative, and it does not matter how small the feedback is, you could say 100 things that this person does really well, one thing that you want them to stop doing, and they will focus on that stop for weeks. And so you want to, start positive. You want to start with reinforcement. It sets the tone for the conversation and lets them know that you see them. You see that they're good work. Nobody wants to come into a performance review or receive feedback and just hear a litany of all the bad things that they've done or the things that you feel that they haven't done well. I've had one of those. I had a performance review where the manager just went through this litany of things that he thought I didn't do well. And when I got to the end of this hour-long plus meeting, I was like, oh gosh, did I do anything right? So you have managers out there and people with leadership titles who feel that a feedback or a review is an opportunity to sort of tear folks down. So start with the positive first. Start with the what worked well. And the other part of when I am the structure is the part that I've adopted. I actually merge two things together. So the start, stop, continue sort of thing, and then I merge with with my own sort of spot self-evaluation. So I will have people do the same thing, but for themselves first. And what I mean by that is I will ask the person, what do you think you did well? And I listen. I don't push back. I just listen. Then I ask them, what do you think you didn't do well? What didn't go so well? And then what would you do differently? And I have them evaluate themselves first, and I listen, and I don't push back on it. And then I deliver my same thing in the same format. And if we have overlap, great. I just repeat it. And I come with examples. I never give feedback without an example. It is just a personal policy. I don't come with my feelings. I don't come with my emotions or I think or I thought. I typically wait for something to have happened 3 times before I really consider it to be something. So first time is a one-off. It's a one-off. If it never happens again, I don't bring it up. The second time, I'm starting to take notice. The third time, it's a pattern and it's something that needs to be addressed. Not that the first time it happens is something really egregious. Yeah, address it. Or if it's the first time something happens and you're like, oh, this person might think that that went well and they should know that it didn't. And I had a manager, a leader who was really good at this. He would pull me aside every time, if I gave a presentation or I was in a meeting or something, he would pull me aside to give me kind of a spot review. And it wasn't always bad. It actually wasn't bad at all. He would say, hey, when you went through the presentation and you got to this particular slide, this wasn't clear, or, you skipped this, or, whatever it was, he would, very quickly give me that spot, and that was great. It was the perfect structure. So the third thing, when you're delivering feedback, so you've assessed their willingness to hear input from you. The second thing was you've adopted the right structure so that you're speaking into someone's listening and their brain is prepared for it. Third thing is feedback should be specific and actionable. And this is when I get back to, again, if you don't have examples, dispassionate, factual examples to give to somebody, the feedback might really be more about you than it is about them. But feedback should be specific and actionable. So you should have examples, have more than one example, 2 at the very least, 3 is the best, but something that you want to see them do. And going back to that manager who was really good at giving me feedback, he would offer me other options or offer other ways that I could have handled things. And so an example of feedback that is sort of vague is, if I said to you, you did really good on that report. Good job. The next time you did the report, what would you do? You would do everything exactly the same way you did it because the overall general feedback you received is you did a good job on that report. If I said to you, you did a great job highlighting the advantages of that vendor in your report, and you communicated how the vendor can meet or exceed our expectations very well. The next time you create a report, you are going to focus on clearly communicating these things and having that same sort of information in that report. So you know exactly what you want what you have to repeat. You know exactly what you did well so that you could do it again. This is why feedback isn't just about what somebody does wrong. You want to reinforce what somebody does well so they repeat that and build on it and evolve on that great skill. So don't just take it as an opportunity to say what somebody should be doing better. And feedback should be ongoing. And there's nothing more irritating. What I loved about what my manager would do is that it was ongoing. I didn't have to wait till the end of the year. I didn't have to wait for 12 months. I didn't have to wait 6 months. I didn't have to wait till the end of the quarter. I would get real-time information about how I'm doing and could adjust, which means I could adjust faster. I could come up the learning curve faster because I was getting more input. You don't run a business and only review your numbers every 12 months. You would not know if you were making money or doing well except for once a year. So if you are a leader or a person in a leadership position with a leadership title, or you are a manager, you should be checking in with people regularly. It should be ongoing, and never surprise someone with feedback. Never surprise someone and get into a quarterly review or a yearly review and say, I observed that you did this thing 12 times and it's really awful and I hate it and, whatever else. And you never gave the person an opportunity to address it, and they had no idea that it was a blind spot. It is unfair, and it's demoralizing to be in the position where you're getting this surprise feedback, and you could have been doing something about it the entire time. So it should be ongoing. And it also should be one where you build a good rapport with somebody. And so this leader that I was talking about before, I was in a situation where there was another very high level VP of the organization, and he would make jokes at my expense constantly. And he was making these jokes in front of other leaders. And I was really good at just sort of, letting it go. But then one day I didn't, and my reaction was somewhat unprofessional. And, but, that VP then went to my manager, who was actually a higher level than him, basically to complain about my reaction. And when my manager brought it to me, he asked me, what happened and to give him my view of events. And when I did, he said, okay, well, this is what you probably should have done differently. First of all, you should have come to me, but in the moment you hadn't come to me. This is what I would have liked to have seen you done, and this is potentially how you could have handled it better. But then he let me know this, which is another part of it being ongoing, is that you want to be an observer also. When you are not the one receiving the feedback, but the feedback is being back channeled to you to give to the person on your team, you want to be an observer of all situations, if possible. So when this particular vice president came to my boss and to talk about my unprofessional reaction, or what he felt was an unprofessional reaction, my boss let him know that he felt that the jokes weren't funny and that the jokes were inappropriate. And the only reason he didn't step in before is because he thought I was okay with them because I hadn't said anything. I was typically very vocal. And the fact that I had waited until it bothered me so much that I had a reaction was my feedback, was something I had to work on. But his feedback to him was, it was inappropriate. You shouldn't have done it. And I don't find it funny. Don't do it again. So he had my back. And so why this is important when it comes to feedback is because I was allowed to tell my version of the story. He didn't just come to me and say, I heard something. He wasn't a direct observer of the situation, of the reaction, but he was a general observer of me, and he was a general observer of this other person and knew that this was going on before anyone told him. And it was therefore a flow. It was ongoing, and it was a way for us to build trust. So the last part of that is to let it go. The fifth thing is letting feedback go. And when I talked about something, if it happens once, it's a one-off. If it happens 3 times, it's a pattern, probably needs to be addressed. If it was a one-off and you talked about it, or if it was a one-off and you didn't talk about it, but you never saw it again, let it go. Feedback is a gift, not a weapon. Don't keep beating people over the head with something. If they made a mistake, they made a mistake. They corrected the mistake, and if it never happened again, great. But don't show up into someone's performance review or show up at a time to give feedback and say, well, remember that one time that you had that, unprofessional reaction? The thing was, that reaction I had with that vice president who was making jokes at my expense, I never heard about it again. It was entrusted with me one time. I took the information. It didn't happen again. I never heard about it from my manager again. And that is important because it allows people to know that you see them, you hear them, and you trust them to come up the curve and make the changes that they need to make without feeling like you are going to punish them. And there are some organizations where that's just built into their DNA. If you made a mistake 5 years ago, 5 days ago, 5 months ago, they are going to keep bringing it up because that's just their DNA. That's just who they are. I would argue that there's not probably an organization of leaders, but that's who it is. So for you, though, if you want to be a leader and you want to be a great leader that engenders trust and a strong team culture, let it go after you've adjusted. And I know I've put a lot of this in the context of a work environment and work culture, but this can work with friends, with your family. This can work outside of work as well. I know it might seem kind of strange to be like, go up to your sister and say, these are the things I'd like you to start, stop, and continue, or continue, stop, and start. But the reason why this format works even outside of work is because for the way men's brains work, this is very, it gets to the headline. It really gets to the point very quickly of what it is that's bothering you and kind of how you would like to see it change. And for women, it works with women because it can be more collaborative, but it's non-judgmental and allows them to solve their own problems. So a lot of times, that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. When men hear a problem, they tend to want to solve it. And women just want to express it. And so this structure allows both men and women to have those different needs met. So that's it. Those are the ways that you can deliver effective feedback effectively, feedback that people can use and do something with. So then subscribe to my YouTube channel, turn on the alerts, join me online at I'm Nile Harris on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, or Nile Harris on LinkedIn. And I look forward to talking with you soon.